Okay, so I have the microphone. I can bring it out to whoever has a question, but I wanted to get things started. I know we're talking to a lot of people. We have 2 senior vice presidents here. So a question I've heard is, what did you look for in promotability? Or in the past, Bobby?
Promotability, well, so first of all, just, I used to be a recruiter for, gosh, in the 80s, for maybe 6 years, and recruiting, going interviewing masters, PhDs, and the one thing I looked for was just enthusiasm. So all the students coming in to interview are pretty bright. There's no question about it. If you could detect some sort of energy, some sort of enthusiasm, that might have brought you a leg into the door. Once you're in the company, that same thing really applies. I think it's companies hire smart people, and whether you're large or small, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
And so, what differentiates the people, I guess, to your promotability piece is taking that technical skill set they brought in and expanding it through their enthusiasm, through their energy. No pun intended. Yeah.
He intended that.
Cindy?
Yeah, so I think for me, probably my own experience with promotability, it reflects what Bobby said. I mean, I'm just super excited about working with other people. And I was sort of the most reluctant manager. I don't know if they would teach this in like MBA school, but they used to come and go, you should be a manager. I'm like, oh, I just want my rocks, right? And I'm really enjoying this. But what people saw, and I think what led people to, probably take some risks on someone like me, was that enthusiasm and that desire to solve challenges with other people, and just sort of barreling in every day with like the most dreaded expression. I had an idea last night, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, you had another idea, and kind of ferreting out the best of them. And I think for me that's been a real pivotal part of the career, and I'm glad to hear Bobby say that he looks for that in others. But it's just sort of goes to really liking what you're doing, and people see that and they say, we'd like to see you spread that infectious enthusiasm around.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, and playing well with others, being technically strong and playing well with others. Thank you both. So, we have a question in the audience, the first of many, I hope.
Your early career path.
So I'll go ahead and start. So I think the question is about mentors. I had a number of people who helped me. A lot of times when I didn't have the experience or even the gravitas when faced with a sort of daunting situation, other people helped me stop and assess the situation and share their own experiences with it. So mentors were extremely important to me, and they still are. I have mutual mentors. I mentor people who say that I'm mentoring them, but I get probably a lot more joy out of hearing them and learning from them. So I think mentors have been, will continue to be a pivotal part of my career. Before I hand over to Bobby, just the whole concept of sponsorship as well, having people who valued what I did, who were willing to stand up and say, she's a little bit different and I think that's good for us, was also incredibly important. So mentors and people who maybe didn't like me as much but saw the value in my approach and the ideas and the teamwork, were both, as sponsors, were really, really important throughout my career.
Yeah. The podium's in the way, so I can't see the answer. The mentor, early in my career, so say 35 years ago, so the word didn't exist too much. You didn't have a thing like some of our big companies have kind of a structured mentor program. You just sort of latched on to people. And so yes, to answer your question, it is very important, to latch on to that person that you can learn from. but people took risks with us, as it might be, or to be. So there, was it a boss that did it? Was it somebody took a risk and said, give Bobby or give Cindy that new job? They took a risk. Were they a mentor? Maybe by definition, maybe they were. I don't know. One of the greatest pleasures I've ever had is people may have viewed me as a mentor and I didn't know it. And that sounds kind of funny, but they may have come up and said, hey, thank you for the difference you've made in my career, or thank you for something you said at a meeting a few years ago that allowed me to do this, this, and this, and this. And I didn't even realize it, which would tell me that, okay, I'm at least sharing some of the things I know, as opposed to having a formal process. I get a little worried when we make it too formal. Like you see these rigid structures, and I'm a mentor and I've got to meet with you twice a month and all that stuff. I prefer it to be natural, where you're connecting with someone that you know well, get along with well, and you'll learn from each other. That's the best one.
Good. Thank you for the question. So we have another question.
Yes, Jim Tucker, and I'll direct this to Cindy. A comment and then a question. In the write-up, in your write-up in the Anomalies book, which will be available after the meeting if you want it in the back of the room, and I'm hoping you'll sign my copy. But you mentioned really how much more you can get done if you convince the drilling department what a good idea they're about to have because you suggested it. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of people learn sometime during their career, and the earlier the better. Second, in this era of push-button prospecting, about 10 years ago or more, you, I think, had an Explorer article where you mentioned, I believe, Nintendo exploration. And so now that you're in the position you're in, how much fun is it at meetings to ask people if they understand everything on their maps?
So first of all, thank you very much for the question about Anomalies. So if you're not aware of that, it's a book published by AAPG. Robbie Grease, this is a labor of love. Oh, thank you. There you go. Robbie Grease, Vern Stefanik from AAPG, and it's a history of women in the U.S. Oil and gas industry. So thank you for the plug. Yeah, it was HGS actually that offered me the opportunity to speak on kind of anything I wanted, and I said, I can talk about technology. This was for a dinner talk. I could talk about sort of recent trends in exploration, and then I said, but I've got this kind of wacky idea, but I don't think it's a talk, and so I said it's called "Is the Workstation Killing Geology?" And so that's what that was the storyline, and so I gave it here first, pretty rough and ready, but anyway, it was a lot of fun. And the premise was that everything that you needed to do, you couldn't necessarily do in sort of the at the time it was like 16 by 24 inch screen, and machine contouring. Like I could look at structure maps, and the key to my structural geology work is that I'm such a bad structural geologist that I always bring a really good one along with me. I could look at maps that you couldn't restore, and you could see it almost immediately. So that was kind of the premise. I think kind of it's probably been closer to 15 years later. Is that true? I think a lot of the sort of machine interpretation and the quality of data, geophysical data that we're seeing, it is pretty fantastic. But it is still incredibly frustrating when you look behind the maps and you start to ask questions about, say, the petroleum system, and how could something have migrated from here to there, and people can't answer. So I still find it, I don't think it's not fun, it's not good sport, but I still find it incredibly important to ask those sort of questions around first principles, to really test a business investment opportunity, because you might be looking at a good map, a pretty map, and that's not the same thing as a valuable opportunity for the company. So I think it's still, to your point, very important to ask the basic sort of first principles of geoscience questions, and you'll still find that even though some of the models are breathtaking and staggering and the displays are amazing, sometimes they still don't hold together when you start to scratch it, so even today. So, but thanks for the questions.
I'll add one thing. If you do get that question on that migration path, and the answer is, it's a torturous path, walk out. It's a dry hole, mark my words. Torturous path, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of you were involved with that.
We've all had those, by the way. It's not just Bobby.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Daniel Schmidt. And my question for you guys, since I'm just finishing up my undergraduate degree, was that while you were doing your undergraduate degree, what were your career goals, and where did you see yourself in 10 years, and how did that match with where you ended up?
Do you want to answer?
It's interesting. I spent a couple of summers offshore as a deckhand on the supply boats. I made, I'm trying to remember what it was, $35 a day. I was working 7 and 7. I made much more money than all my friends in their summer jobs. The key was, though, all those boats running out there with logging units and pipe and cement. And I didn't know why that rig was there. And I was asking lots of questions. Plus, grew up in New Orleans fishing offshore with my father, and he was an attorney, and I'd ask him why that platform was there, and he gave me an attorney answer, so I didn't have an answer. So the point was, interestingly enough, the only real target I had is I wanted to be a geologist. My father's best friend was a geologist, took me to a well to see it, and he was an independent. So you kind of combine those strings. I knew I wanted to be a geologist, but in particular, I guess the only time I ever set a target is I wanted to be in the offshore. Now, in New Orleans at the time, in the late 70s, that was the big growth area. It was exciting. I grew up with it, summer jobs with it. And so you might say that's the only target I set. And fortunately, when Texaco hired me, they assigned me to the offshore division. I didn't even ask for that. It just fell that way. For the 10-year piece, I never really had those types of targets. I had a boss, Cindy and I were talking earlier. He asked me to be an operating company level head, that pretty high. And I never could answer the same question for him. And he said, are you the kind of guy that just shoots the arrow up in the air and you just go where it lands? I said, well, yeah, as long as the wind doesn't kind of blow it backwards. So I think it's back to what many of the points Cindy made. You want to be a geologist, that's your box you checked. You want to be in maybe this type of setting, okay, shoot for that. But once you're in it, do the very best job you can. Don't worry about that next job. When you're doing a very good job and you're making a difference in your team, the phone will ring, next jobs will show up. Some of them will surprise you in totally different settings that you have never expected. So I get a little hesitant laying out, recommending people lay out a target other than that initial getting yourself into the start. I don't know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so congratulations on your recognition this evening. So great. Yeah, for me in undergrad, I actually kind of knew I wanted to go to grad school, but that's because I graduated in 1982 and sort of that was the only option. So I wanted to, I aspired to go continue to do a PhD and to teach. So that was really where my heart's at. I got a little pragmatic in there and decided sort of, working for a while would be good. And I found that in the industry, and I think, I didn't really mean to do this, but I spent a little bit of time reflecting on just the teaching that I've gotten to do through my day job at BP. And so I found that I could still teach and do, a little bit of kind of basic research in support of, especially offshore reservoirs that, back in the day, we didn't know a lot about turbidites in deep water, and they just tend to be displayed in some of the most glorious places like Arkansas. But, France, Quebec, California, they show up in some really neat places. So I found that I could do the teaching side and the research side actually while still working in the energy industry. So it all kind of kind of clicked after that, and that's my story.
Good question, thank you, Daniel. I got one, wait, I got the microphone for you.
That'll be my phone.
Wait,
Charles.
hold on, Mike, you got one ahead.
Hi, my name is Jessica Hayward. I have a question. It might not be as straightforward to answer, but when Cindy, you gave your speech, you were saying that a lot of times when you want to enforce your ideas, you have to tell someone, 7 times over and convince them. And I always go about the route where I plant the seed and I pretend like it's their idea and I try to make them think they thought it up, but it's the way that I actually planted the seed in their mind. So when it comes to inspiration, a lot of times it's really easy to do when you're 100% confident in your idea or your prospect or your asset. But a lot of the times, you're working tons of things, and geologically, we don't have the right answer all the time. So you don't have the confidence behind your idea. You might have limited data, or you're just not sure, or it's all like geologic hunches. So when do you fight for your hunch, or when do you push, or do you always push and just wait for it to stick, or do you, in your experiences, what have you done?
So, I think I do have a rule. If someone's 100% confident in their prospect, walk away.
It's torturous.
Yeah, it's torturous. And like Bobby said, back away slowly. And we used to have a couple people that always go, there's an oil field down there. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, how can you say that? And there never was. So I think the sort of when do you go with your hunches, what I usually do, and I know Bobby will want to comment on this as well, I usually just share the concept with as many people as possible. And everyone, by asking questions or contributing little bits and pieces to the investigation, they'll give you kind of like I don't know if it's Julius Caesar, they'll give you elements of the story, like I saw that in Angola and it didn't go well, or, this just happened in Guyana and you need to be aware of that. And so for me, it was taking the opportunities out, whether they were notional ideas, leads, or something more mature as a prospect, and sharing them with other scientists, learning from them, and eventually that kind of which one to really promote and push forward. It's the story starts to come together with all these pieces, all these little bits of analogy, all these pieces of insight. So I would just sort of peer review constantly things, and you don't have to have a big meeting and invite 12 people from all over the world and give cookies and coffee. Just take little pieces out. What do you think? Put a seismic line on the wall. What do you think of this this picture? Anyone seen this before? I was notorious for cutting little pieces of seismic out and go, anyone seen one of these before? And that was usually kind of a great way to get insights. So the gut and the when do you feel sort of positive about promoting an idea or pushing an idea forward through the corporate structure usually was informed by other people. And then before I turn it over to Bobby, one other thing is really important for me was to learn to tell the story of multiple models without killing people with confusion and boredom. So I'd be interested in what you say about that. Just being able to share the uncertainty, share the multiple models, and still remain with a viable opportunity. That's an art form, and it's really, really important to learn so that you don't sort of take on the mantra of the salesperson or the snake oil pitch and feel like you've done the right representation of something. Bobby's seen a lot of prospects, so let's see what he says.
I can't see either wood in that spot here. You hit the nail on the head, but you also use the word hunch. And there's probably the last 5 years in my career, I would go to Washington, D.C. every year. And I'd make the rounds of House and Senate staff, the State Department and others. And the presentation I showed was from first hunch to first oil, the making of a discovery. And it was triggered by a bunch of summer interns coming into Chevron and said, don't tell us where you're drilling all around the world and give us a standard exploration show and tell. Tell us how you make a discovery. Of course, we knew how to do that. I wouldn't be presenting to summer interns. And they'd be presenting to me. Or something like that. But it's to your point, it's that hunch. You don't want to be a pest. You know, organizations have cultures, and you need to understand how to work in that culture. But at the same time, you do, if you get the listen, and when you get the feedback that says, I've seen that somewhere, no, I've done this, I've done that, sometimes go away, work it, and come back and prove that that's not correct, right? The hunch that we presented was Tahiti in the Gulf of Mexico, what, a $500 million barrel discovery. We picked it up in 1994. I was the exploration manager in the Gulf. So, no, excuse me, we picked it up, I can't remember, a series of years, but 94, 95, 96. But the hunch was starting, the team came and blamed me for the delay. No, too deep. Too deep in water, too deep in the geology. They went away and they showed me why it's not too deep in the sense of what can be done. The next lease sale came and blamed me again, too high a risk. Came back and showed how they could mitigate different pieces of the risk. The third effort, and this was over a period of a couple of years, we started to bid on it. And we picked it up, and it was a discovery by 2001 and on production by 2009. So it was a 15-year window. So take those points Cindy said. Don't give up. Listen to the feedback you got, and you're still believing it, and you're still passionate, come back again. And you know, it might be $500 million barrels waiting for you, right? A hunch.
That's a good hunch.
Yeah, that was nice. Hunch.
Mike, I got a question for you, Bobby. How did you spend all those years at Texaco Chevron and you never went to Midland?
I did go to Midland for the day. No, in seriousness, you know, as most of my career, not all of it, but much of it was most of it was exploration. So from an exploration point of view, it wasn't anything that we had any activity. Texaco had a lot of that legacy acreage, you know, of course, on that we're drilling now, Chevron working in conventional fields. So from my piece of the business, it wasn't. Now, the exploration and production piece, when you say, well, why didn't you get a production job there for that experience you just boasted that everybody should get? I found out years later from Bruce Applebaum, some of you know Bruce very well, that he was in a human resource meeting at Texaco and they were sending me to Midland to get operations and development experience. He was all on paper, ready to go, and he raised his hand and said no. They said, let's move him back to New Orleans to, quote, get us in the deep water, when deep water was a 4-letter word in our company and others. Someone talked about mentors and things like that. Well, here's somebody that was paying attention, and his view, my skill. I don't know how that's doing. Oh, it's that thing.
I don't know if it's this thing or her thing, but
No, she doesn't have one. I'll turn it off.
We can holler.
Okay, so the point is, back to mentors or someone taking a risk. And yes, it would have been a great experience for me, and I'd have been there. But somebody said, nope, it's a better fit here. And I went, and I didn't know that till years later that I was that close to it.
So I think that's actually a really insightful question, because a lot of times you just sort of head down, do your job, and you assume everyone's noticing. And I learned that it doesn't work that way. But it was also kind of awkward, you know, especially as a new hire, kind of knocking on my line manager's door and saying, hi. And just kind of felt a little bit weird. So I started doing following that rule of no surprises. And so if something was happening, either, positive, or there was something wasn't working, I'd always check in with my supervisor or take the team, my colleagues in and say, here's what we found. And that, I think, was always greatly appreciated, because then you made it easy for them to do that aspect of their job, what's happening, there in the office and what are you current on. So you're sharing what you're doing, but you're also engaging them in what you're doing, and they'll course correct you right then and there instead of waiting 2 weeks or 2 months, which could be just an unnecessary waste of time and then subsequently emotion.
Yeah, I just would second everything you said. The spirit of no surprises is a good way to say it. And you'll judge that. We're all different, and supervisors and team members are all different. We have different styles and different approaches, and you'll figure that out. But the actual pace of that, but if it's a positive or a negative surprise, don't let it be. Have communicated enough to where it wasn't.
So, we're having some microphone issues. Yeah. So I have a question, and we're lucky. We're right here in the center of the Gulf of Mexico, one of the world's greatest petroleum provinces, and we're talking to two people who have spent a lot of time seeing the business cycle, the ups and downs. So, Cindy and Bobby, would you tell us a little bit about how you weather the not so good times and how some of the great ideas happen that lead to the new spurts of discoveries that rejuvenate a super basin?
Well, since I have the mic, if it doesn't squeak, well, when I started, you saw on the slide, it was 1979. Offshore was the boom. 600 feet of water was deep water. Engineers said you couldn't drill beyond that and make money. The geophysicists said you couldn't see below this stuff that looks like salt, and the geologist said there can't be sand out there anyway. So I had senior people saying, we'll probably have 10 more years of the shelf. Well, look what that did. The shelf's still going. And then the deep water piece, we just started putting together sand stores, we started imaging below the salt. The engineers, find it and they will come kind of approach to things. And the next thing you know, I left in May, as I mentioned, and early 2018, late, I guess it was that when it was, our deep water team in the Gulf had 2 discoveries they participated in. So here's 39 years later, a basin that when I started we were told was tired. The Dead Sea, go Google that, you'll sometimes find the Gulf of Mexico. It is still thriving. So that's been my experience. Our industry has ups and downs, you just ride through them.
Yeah, so I started just saying kind of mantra about the Gulf of Mexico, and then we saw in the deep water a play work in the kind of late 1980s. So when Shell led the discovery of the Mars and Ursa basins, those were bright spot anomalies, and the industry got really, really excited about that play and moved in, and some people made discoveries and others didn't. There was a string of 7 notorious dry holes. And so that was one of those times that kind of the first round, we call it the first round of exploration in deep water. And many people did walk away, and that's the first time I heard the Dead Sea comments. And so what BP did that was really kind of cool is they said, instead of firing all of us, they said, we actually think this basin has a lot of promise. And it's in Charles' parlance, it's a super basin. As I did anticipating Charles's question. There's a world-class source rock, which I just nearly hit myself with. There are world-class reservoirs that were established by. This is one of the Thunder Horse reservoirs. You'll rarely see anything like this, and then lots of seals, lots of sort of structuration from salt. And so what BP set a small team of us out to do was they said, we want you to do a big regional study and tell us, do you see the potential in the basin that we think is probably there? And if so, where do you see it and how do you think it might manifest itself? So instead of being fired, we were able to learn sort of the concepts that BP had applied elsewhere in the world, here apply them in the Gulf of Mexico, and we did high grade a couple of areas. and had a lot of subsequent success. And what we had to do is we had to move out of the thinking of top-down, bright spot geophysical attributes. We were not very good at that in the Gulf of Mexico. And we started thinking back to the kind of ideas we talked about earlier, the first principles of geology. Where might the reservoirs be developed? We had done a lot of work in the upper slope, which is traditionally somewhat of a bypass or sediment-starved or place. And we saw that reservoirs were developing sort of the middle and lower slope, so great reservoir development, lots of sub-regional seals, regional seals, and we started looking for very structures rather than some of the complex stratigraphic looking traps that weren't working. We started going back for sort of inverted basins, salt cord anticlines, and that worked. It worked for our portfolio, and it certainly worked for the rest of industry. And I think we've seen that cycle of thinking, as Bobby said, thinking the basin is done, and then someone comes in with a twinkle in their eye and busts the dogma that the basin's over and makes a whole, opens up a new play, comes up with a new set of concepts to be tested. And I think, the Gulf of Mexico, like I said, we use the parlance rounds. In our sort of rounds, we're well into the fourth round, and it keeps, congratulations, by the way, on your latest 2 discoveries, keeps yielding new discoveries. So it's all about having a great source rock, having all the elements of a petroleum system, and then just thinking, how could those come together in, sort of wild and wonderful ways to create opportunities that have not yet been tested by the industry. And that's that sort of discovery thinking, Charles, wherever you are, that discovery thinking trademark Sternbach, is really important in a basin like this. And it just, you want to take that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I guess, sometimes we're all wired a little differently, and some might be wired where they tend to see the glass half full or the glass half empty. And yes, maybe the people that can see it half full sometimes feel like it's only a quarter full or a third full, but you just keep at it. And if you enjoy what you're doing, back to that rise early piece, that'll tend you to get you through the times that may cause it a project or a thought or a hunch to go a step backwards. So just don't stop. Don't let it get you down. There's no other way to really say it that I can think of.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is just sometimes the timing's not right. So it might be, this is awesome, but not now. There's uncertainty in the terms, uncertainty in the government, things like that. So, great idea, not now. And then other times, sometimes it is too much, there is too much risk associated with it. And, having been involved in certainly my career allotment of dry holes, and the worst, marginal discoveries. I'm the queen of the marginal discovery, which you can't walk away from. You just keep testing it, and don't do that. don't do that. And then we would farm it out or give it away usually, and someone else makes a lot of money off of that. So sometimes I would rather have sort of been a part of a decision not to drill something because it exposes too much risk, and I'd always rather have been in that side of something than, oh my gosh, it's a dry hole. That being said, if you don't put opportunities forward and push them and make sure that people understand them, then no one will ever drill anything, and the industry's done. Mm-hmm. So it's a fine line, but sometimes the timing's not right. And sometimes it is just too risky for your portfolio or too uncertain, and it's okay to hold on those. I've watched other people make discoveries on like twinkles in my eye, and I'm very happy for them because I knew that it was probably never going to happen at our company. I'm just glad to see the idea tested. So.
Hello, Wayne Camp with Anadarko. You both, like many of us in the room, have had long, illustrious careers. But one question I get from many young professionals is, with all this drumbeat about global warming, anti-fracking, anti-pipelines, anti-oil business, you know, what's your outlook? Are we younger professionals going to be able to have 30-year careers like many of us have?
So I'll start. So I think, you know, every energy projection for the U.S. or for the world will show actually in, you know, that oil and gas plays a long role in the energy mix globally, you know, decades and decades. So I think that there is certainly you know, continued opportunity in the parts of energy that many of us are most familiar with. I also think there are other careers, and I mentioned some of this earlier, that involve the subsurface, but they're you know, sort of new specialisms, new specialties coming to light. You know, talked about carbon capture and the sequestration storage side. There's a lot of potential in there for a subsurface career, and you know, once the U.S., who is pretty much the global leader in this space, actually starts to move into to being able to store CO2, maybe other gases in the subsurface, a whole different work stream that comes up around what are the best ways to do that, how are you monitoring that, how are you assuring that those gases may stay in the ground. And there are other kind of interesting, you know, sort of things in the energy mix. Mineralization as a carbon capture tool, I think is fascinating. I'm a little obsessed with it. I can't make it work, but at any sort of economic side, but I think it's fascinating, and I wish joy upon the people who do make it work. But I think, you know, our energy in terms of this exploring and utilizing the subsurface is going to be with us through all of everyone in the room's careers. Bobby, you?
There you are. I agree. I mean, and well said. I mean, what we're probably doing when we ask that kind of question is thinking about our jobs in the way they've been done for the past 50 years. So there's lots of different ways to be part of the solution. One is, Cindy said, it's a huge effort. Oil and gas are going to be part of our energy portfolio for a long time. Decades and decades and decades, because there's nothing yet of scale to take its place. So there's that role. To your point about the sequestration and carbon capture and all the roles, nobody knows the Earth better than Earth scientists. So a lot of it is going to be the generation of Earth scientists coming out of school now are going to be thinking of roles to address the challenge in ways that you and I probably can't think about it. The role of delivering the energy that's needed till there is a different portfolio, and then the role of being part of the solution to the challenge. So look at it that way. And I'm sure we're not even thinking about it. It's even beyond what you described.
Okay, how about a joyful moment? Something, an aha moment. I'm sure each of you have had many issues. Something that you just saw and you realized, wow. That you'd like to share?
Geologically or just life in general?
In the energy business, how about that?
Well, one was that the parking was free and I'm retired, so that's good. You know, probably the aha, it's not a moment, it's not a prospect. It's, and I did think about this as I was leaving, in addition to just a couple of goofy slides. You heard me describe what deep water was when I started. It couldn't exist. The second piece was shale. So shale was, and I use that word generically because it's really just crummy rock, right? Because that's what we're doing now, is working with crummy rock. It's more than just shale, as you know. But shale was what, a source, right? It was a seal. It was, the crummy rock was something we were supposed to drill through on the way to the good stuff.
The waste zone.
Right. And so when you think about it, in the span of one person's career, 39 years, one person that didn't have anything to do with developing the things, in the span of one person's career, 39 years, you had a play type that couldn't exist, deep water, for 3 different reasons, geologically, geophysically, and engineering. Couldn't exist. And now it's basically our bread and butter as an industry. A second play type that couldn't exist, shale, quote unquote, for all the reasons I just said. And now look at it. It's, the Permian is, the Earth's magnetic field will shift with all the steel, it moved over to Permian. But the point is, it's a significant play type that couldn't exist. So those of you in the room that are just starting out in the span of your future 39 years, what 2 things that when you first walk into the office that your bosses said can't exist, won't happen, not possible, I tried that. What is your deep water? What is your shale? And that 39 years from now, you're sitting in a similar setting saying these 2 things couldn't exist, and they did. And one of them may be, back to your point about we're tied to carbon and everything else. As energy earth scientists, you were part of that solution as well. So give it some thought.
Cool. I'm glad you said shale because mine's salt. So I think we had a really big aha moment. I can build on that, sort of do the regional story of the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, there's a lot of salt in the deep water Gulf of Mexico it's Jurassic salt that's been mobilized through sediment loading, and it's become, entrained and really a part of what makes us, love and hate the basin. We love it because it sets up the petroleum system, the tortuous, not so tortuous petroleum system. And we hate it because it creates a lot of imaging challenges because of the high velocity of the near surface salt. So when we did our first sort of displays to BP management, the guys from London on the Deepwater Gulf of Mexico, we had all these holes in our maps where the salt's at. And these guys were clearly, there's some amazing geoscience minds in BP, and they were like, what part of where are the fields are these? Could they possibly be associated with the salt? Because we were kind of like, we're having a hard time finding some structures. And sure enough, when we started to embrace the salt, learn to love the salt, use our imagination to see how the salt and the sediment interacted, that's where, lo and behold, that the really honking big structures were. So we had to switch our paradigm from run from the salt to go to the salt to see where the potential usually lies. So yours is shale and deep water, and mine is salt and deep water. So or mine are, sorry.
So are there any other questions? Oh, we have one? Good.
Oh, I thought you said want a beer.
You can always count on good old Martin Cassidy.
Anyway, that's my name.
Hi, Martin.
My question is this. We have the great crew change. We also have the great energy change. We have moved, I think it's subtle, but we have moved from oil to a great emphasis and an economic opportunity in gas. And if gas is cheap and there's enough of it, what do your companies think the effect will be on these expensive offshore oil plays?
You want to go first?
Well, I personally don't have any offshore fields, in my
In your logo?
my current portfolio, so that's why I don't have a logo. But those fields are in production now, and Cindy said, well, decades and decades we need oil. It's not going to change that delivery. I don't see any change. Actually, to tell you the truth, we in my former company at Chevron, we were looking for oil probably more aggressively than even in gas, depending on where in the world it was and what it was. And that could change and may be different now for all I know. But oil was definitely part of our exploration portfolio Of course, you know, if we go after oil, we'll find gas, and if we go after gas, we'll find oil, right? That seems to be where it works. But I think they're both part of the energy mix, and they will be for a good long while. And individual companies will adjust their strategies accordingly, and where they want to go and what they want to do and how they see the future. But as an industry, both are just as active.
Yeah, I think that was well said. I don't have a lot to offer other than we started using the term advantaged oil, at least for the near term. And I think that's advantage. There are many different interpretations of what advantaged oil might mean, but sort of coming out of the last sort of big price drop in sort of 2014, we said we're going to focus on things that bring oil that brings a lot of value to the company, and a lot of that was in basins where there's established infrastructure or the economic case for developing oil or gas was really, really strong. So I'm like Bobby, I haven't seen a lot of change. We do like gas. We have shifted our portfolio to be a little bit gassier, which then means, as Bobby said, we found more oil. So, but again, it's really about the economics, and at the same time, we are investing and looking at a lot of other energy sources to assure that, and I think many people in the room, no, Chevron's the same, want to be energy providers for the next couple of 100 years. So we're looking at all that very, very long term. What does our energy portfolio look like, sort of 50, 60 years from now? So. And it probably still includes some oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Bob. Well, APG just turned 101, so we've been around for 100 years, so hopefully, like some of the other companies and energy sources, our best days are still ahead. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you. If you'd like to come up, grab a book or say hello to the speakers, please do. And with that, we're adjourned.